I've got it. Okay, I'm gonna have people in. There's 5. All right. Hi.
Hi everyone, welcome.
Good evening. Welcome.
Hello, welcome.
Thank you.
We are the small group that can hang out on a Thursday night, recording this for the rest of the benefit of the community. So I'm glad you're here.
Somebody might rely on my math skills.
No.
You got this, Jennifer. You got this.
Yeah, you do.
I'm not going to prove anything impressive.
Okay, good. Perfect. It would be disappointing if it was impressive because that's not the experience kids have all the time. So we can start.
Oh, it was so hard for you, wasn't it?
All right. Welcome, everybody. You found yourself at IVA's first.
Oh, sorry, Jackie. Sorry.
Welcome, everybody. This is Jackie Bryant. I'm the principal at IVA. And you found yourself at IVA's First Parent Academy. I'm coming to you from my home. You are also, our teachers normally always do that. I just want you to know I hid all my dishes, so it looks like I have a clean countertop over there, but they're all in the sink. And tonight we have 80 minutes to be together in order to talk about how to support our kids in math. And we have the most amazing math teachers. I have a couple of announcements, but before we begin, while I'm making these announcements, you will be able to do the interactive element of tonight if you are comfortable doing so by going to joinpd.com and typing in that code, those 6 letters, KWA8AM. But in order to do this, you have to be as skilled as your kids are at doing 2 screens at once. And we know that some kids are so skilled, they're like watching TV while school's going on. So there's issues with skills, but if you can handle it tonight, go to joinpd.com and type in KWA8AM, and then we can get to interact in that way. Also, so the code will be up in the top corner. And actually, thank you, Ms. Simpson. Ms. Simpson has put into the chat the directions for how to join. But Ms. Noble, you can go to the next slide. I'll do our quick announcements. Announcements. You all probably need to eat tomorrow, and our PTA has put together our first Fox Spirit Night. So if you're gonna eat, and especially if you don't feel like making your own food, you can go to any Panda Express in the United States. That means if you have family in New Hampshire, they can also go to their Panda Express and use the code that is right there on the screen, 900404, in order to raise some funds for IVA. The closest Panda Express to IVA is the one on Atlantic, and I'm glad for our PTA to put together things like this. Okay, next slide. Thank you. There are a lot of families who have gotten the Parent Square app, but it's really about 23% of our families. The Parent Square app is amazing. I don't know if any of you who are here tonight have been able to use it, but this is a great way to get into quick contact with your students' teachers, or all of the teachers, and all of the announcements from the school will come through this app. That is all. It is free. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you for bearing with me with the announcements. Okay, now we're to the real purpose of being here tonight. So every year, beginning in the first year our school opened, we realized that we do such great, rigorous, and supportive instruction in mathematics, but that for kids coming from elementary to middle school, this math becomes a really big deal. Actually, for about 1/3 of our kids, there's a lot of struggle. And families don't necessarily feel equipped to support their kids in math. So tonight we have all of our teachers here. In a moment, I'll have them introduce themselves to you. And what they're going to do tonight is try to help you all know how to approach deep mathematical understanding with your kids, in line with the way that our teachers do through an intellectual virtues approach, which means that we really value their thinking in the midst of their learning. I'm going to have our teachers introduce themselves to you. And instead of me introducing all of them, I'm asking them to share the name of the teacher that they work with, what grades and subjects they teach, and also something that they really appreciate about that teacher, either the way that they collaborate together, the way that they teach or think about math, or just think about learning. So we'll have Miss Noble begin, Carrie Noble begin by introducing Miss Simpson.
Hi, everybody. Well, you'll find out who I am later, but I'm going to introduce my coworker, Kathy Simpson. She teaches 6th grade math and one block of 7th grade math and a really great new elective called psychology. And what I really admire about Kathy as a teacher and as a person is how carefully she considers everything before she does it. And she does so with such a calm manner. So when students have questions or if there's concerns in professional development, she's always very thoughtful and considerate and thinks through things very logically and very carefully before she jumps to any sort of conclusions. And your kids are super lucky to have such a kind, considerate, and thoughtful 6th grade math teacher.
Well, gosh, thanks for that, Miss Noble. I appreciate that. And I get the pleasure of introducing Miss Gabi Schmidt, my Math 7 co-pilot in this crazy, rigorous IVA curriculum we have. And something that I really admire about Gabi is her drive to give our students such deep and thorough tools and videos and new strategies and websites, and there's just so much that she's bringing to the table. So I just really appreciate having such a lovely, wonderful, thoughtful, thorough co-host when it comes to Math 7 especially.
Thank you, Miss Simpson. I love being your co-host too. And I have the pleasure of introducing Miss Carrie Noble, who is our OG math teacher at IVA. She's the very first, and she's been here ever since. And I am so grateful for Carrie's just deep love and appreciation for math and the way that she sees it everywhere and she gets excited about it. And it just spills over into her teaching and the way that she passes that on to students and helps them to be curious, and just there's no limit to okay, this is what you need to know. It's just, she expands people's view of mathematics, and it's just really fun to be around her. And I look to her for answers to everything in mathematical teaching. So thanks for being such a great role model for us, Ms. Noble.
And is this when we go to the next slide?
We can't, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so in the next slide, we've got an opening question that you guys can put in the chat. So put in the chat, let everybody know, share one way that you are making online learning work for your family. And we're putting this out there because maybe some people have some strategies that will help all of us. So anything you can think of that's making this work for your family. Nice. We have Linda saying she lets everybody work at their own speed and not comparing one person to another. Getting away from the screen during breaks. Ooh, setting alarms for the bell schedule. Really good idea. We have some older kids that like to come in tardy. They need those little bells to remind them. Yeah, letting your kids know that it's okay just to walk away right now and do what you can. Ms. Bryant says we are carefully talking about stress and self-care. Ms. Schmidt says good sleep. Movement breaks. All right. Okay, so we're gonna move on. Thank you for sharing, everybody. Ooh, Ms. Bryant just started standing up, working at a stand-up desk. Super jealous. That sounds like a good way to use your muscles. I've also seen students on those big exercise balls in class, which is really, really great. But it's funny to watch them, like their heads bob up and down the whole time, but it's nice to see them moving. Okay, so as you guys know, years ago, when Common Core state standards were adopted, there were these mathematical practices, and these are kind of the core of what our math curriculum pushes towards. Ooh, I'm also noticing in the chat, snacks at the ready. It's always nice. And walks with the dog. Oh, dogs are so happy that we're all home right now. Okay, so we have these math practices. These are kind of the core of our math curriculum at IVA. It's how we try to do all the math that we do. So just looking at these, does anybody see one that really stands out to them or that maybe they use in their real life? You can unmute yourself and share. We're not a big group, so feel free to like unmute, share your thinking. Is there one of these where you're like, yep, I use that every day in my job? Anybody feeling brave? Ooh, getting their homeschool work environment organized. So we're still on, everybody's sharing really good strategies. You can also share in their chat if there's one of these math practices that stand out to you.
Miss Noble, I
Yeah.
love that it's a math practice, but the first one, like I feel like every day, constantly, I'm trying to make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. And I don't know if it's there, but I'm trying to find different, I guess it's different tools to solve them instead of just always me trying to figure it out.
So maybe use appropriate tools and solve strategically. So knowing which tools to use when. Yeah, and so a lot of the skills that we use regularly to solve math problems are applied to other disciplines as well, right? Like math is kind of just this opportunity to practice all of these things which apply to many, many areas of our lives. Nicole in the chat says attend to precision, absolutely. Model with mathematics. Ooh, I want to know how Dana models with mathematics. So if you want to share, Dana, you're welcome to.
I could share. I would say
Go
the
ahead.
first one too, just trying to make sense of things. And we're musically inclined at our house. So sometimes we'll just try to link a song to what we're trying to figure out and just persevere. Recently, my daughter said something about something that was going on in her math class. She's a sophomore in high school. She's like, oh my gosh, it reminded me of these lyrics of the song. And she paired the concept with that song and just kind of made sense. So yeah, so perseverance. We struggle, but we're trying to hang on to the grit as much as we can.
Yeah, well, and that also reminds me of that 8, look for and express regularity and repeated reasoning. So like that making connections cross-curricular is like looking for the repeated pattern there. Okay, so these are kind of the core of like what teaching is at IVA for math. I'm gonna go on to the next slide. So at IVA, in addition to like really great curriculum that they do every day in class, we ask our students to do these things called POWs, which stands for Problem of the Week. But it's not really a week because we give them like a month because they're 6th graders. If they were in college, we'd give them a week, right? So I don't know how many of you have seen the movie, I think it's Good Will Hunting, where there's like a very difficult problem on the chalkboard and then Matt Damon's like a janitor and he solves the problem. That's amazing. Does this sound familiar? I see a few people nodding. Okay. So that's like a problem of the week that a math professor would put out there and it would challenge the students to like solve it, you know, this very difficult problem. And then they have to do their write-up proving that their solution is a good solution and all of that. So we brought that down to the middle school level, and we do these problems where we ask kids to really grapple with some longer term questions. And the reason we do this is because we want them to think and act like actual mathematicians do. And when mathematicians, math professors who are writing papers on math and trying to go into the areas of math that are still being explored, when they're working on problems, they don't even know if it has a solution, right? They're working on the edge of mathematics where they're not even sure if what they're doing is going to lead to anything. And we want to give the kids this feeling of working on something that's just beyond where they are in their content, so they can get that chance to practice tenacity and push themselves further. So one such example is, you see all these beautiful tiles here. This was a problem that was just recently solved. And we're gonna listen to a little 3-minute story about the types of problems that we do when we do POWs. This actually ties in super well to what 7th graders are doing right now, because it's almost exactly what they're doing right now with like tessellations and things. But it's a good story, even if, I had already opened the link. Here it is. Okay, now I always have a problem with my sound. So give me a thumbs up if you can hear this.
Consider the ceramic on the floor beneath you. Those squares or rectangles tile the plane. That's a mathematical term, and finding a new shape that covers a flat surface using only exact copies of that one shape without overlapping or leaving any gaps is a mathematical challenge. All triangles can tile the plane, all quadrangles too. But only 14 pentagons, 5-sided shapes, could do it, or so we thought, to the extent that we thought about this at all. Researchers have now discovered a 15th, and here to tell us about this new pentagon to tile the plane is Julie Rehmeyer. She's a math and science journalist and contributing editor to Discover magazine. Welcome back to the program.
It's my pleasure, Robert. Happy to talk to you.
How big a deal is this?
It's exciting. It's been 30 years since we found one of these in the past, and now we found another.
Who found this new pentagon?
3 mathematicians at the University of Washington, Casey Mann, Jennifer McLeod, and David Von Durow. And David Von Durow is actually an undergraduate.
And there have been many searches for these geometric shapes over the decades?
There have. The first pentagonal tiling was found back in 1918. A German mathematician, Karl Reinhardt, found the first 5 types of pentagons that will tile the plane, and the search has been on ever since.
I'm looking at a representation of a plane that's been filled with this particular pentagon, with identical copies of it, and it's odd to describe. It looks to me like the way home plate might appear to a drunken pitcher who's staring at it from 60 feet away.
That's a great description. When they're all put together into a tiling of the full plane, to me it looks kind of like the back of a snake. It's quite a beautiful pattern.
And is this just a piece of pure, not that's a small thing, of pure mathematics, or are there likely to be applications of a new pentagon with which you can tile a plane?
Well, it's always hard to predict exactly what the applications will be, though I think one prediction is safe, which is that artists are likely to make use of this pattern. There's a very rich field of mathematical art. There are also likely to be more practical applications. Crystals form in these patterns. They make use of the patterns that are forced by geometry. Viruses also form, the structure of viruses are formed in similar ways. There may well be uses of it in engineering, in creating materials with novel properties that have molecular building blocks along these lines, but we will just have to wait and find out what clever scientists do with it.
This particular pentagon was, I don't know whether we say really discovered or created or derived by computer.
That's right. This team did mathematical work to find a way of searching methodically through all the possibilities, and they're continuing to work on it.
I'm thinking ahead to hexagons. Regular hexagons fit together, and as is, they tile the floor.
That's right.
But regular pentagons, that is a pentagon with 5 equal sides, they don't tile the plane.
That's correct. And you can figure that out for yourself just by giving it a try. If you do it, either you're going to have to make them overlap or you're going to have to leave gaps.
It's a project for this evening.
So to make them all fit together, somehow you've got to squish them around.
Okay. Well, that's something to think about. Julie Raymeyer, thanks for talking with us once again.
Thank you.
Julie Raymeyer is a math and science journalist and contributing editor to Discover magazine.
And now, more.
Okay, so that's just an example of how mathematicians really work on problems like this. And my favorite thing about this, my favorite thing about discovering new math is the people who are discovering it often don't know if and what it would be used for in the future. They're just discovering it because it's beautiful. And then it almost inevitably ends up being helpful in some way. So Ms. Bryant, you have a question that you're pushing. Yeah, it says, does not sound like school back. Sounds like real life. Do you all get much pushback from students about the POWs? I don't know, Ms. Simpson, have you noticed any pushback about POWs from the students?
I wouldn't say pushback. I would say sometimes trying to find the easy way out is the most common thing. And that's where we have to really bring up those ideas of intellectual tenacity and perseverance. So I wouldn't call it pushback. I would just say us pushing forward a little bit maybe is the way.
Yeah, I also wanted to share, there's also this millennium problems. We're not going to listen to it, but there are these math problems, 6 millennium prizes in math. You can earn $1 million if you solve them. So if you're financially motivated and you want to struggle through some math problems, just, it's a thing that's out there. So
That thing's still going, Ms. Noble?
I don't know. Let's see. It says 1 solved. This was from 2010. Maybe they've all been solved.
I was super interested for a minute there. I'll have to look into it.
Okay. So this is the kind of tenacity we're asking our kids to do. We want them to push through difficult problems and come to some solutions. Now, the problems they're solving, we know have answers to them. So we're not actually asking them to do unthinkable things. We're just asking them to do something that's a little more meaty and not going to have a nice, simple answer. Are there any questions so far? Because I feel like I'm just bulldozing ahead. Okay. What I love about the tessellation project is pretty much anybody could do it. It's a nice, easy, starting point. So this is when we ask kids to do a POW, or problem of the week, we give them about a month, and it's got 5 sections. And I'm going to pass it off to Ms. Simpson to kind of talk about the 5 sections of the POW.
Yeah, absolutely. So the 5 sections are really structured to break it down into easy chunks. That might be one way to think about the sections. Section is the problem statement, which is really just allowing students to rewrite the problem in their own words, which gives them a chance to make sure they understand what's being asked of them. And it also gives us as teachers a chance to correct any misconceptions or to kind of what is the question asking? So it does give that opportunity to clarify anything that might be confusing about the problem. And then that leads to the process, which is actually problem. You kind of get your hands dirty. You might have to print some papers out. You might have to, kind of look at it a few different times. Am I freezing? Is that why you're jumping in?
I think you're glitching a little bit.
Oh no, of course.
Do you want one of us to?
Yeah, Ms. Schmidt, do you want to take over? Because
Sure.
7 and 6 are pretty similar.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So then the second section is the process section. And this is really, really key for them to think about breaking down how they actually solved a problem. So often, they have to look at this multiple times. They're stuck for a week or two. We'll give them a couple little hints here and there. Somehow, eventually, they'll figure out a solution. But this process is where they have to put into words, they have to kind of slow down their thinking and explain, when they got stuck, what did they do? And how did they get to the next section and all that kind of stuff. So you get really good, we get to see inside their beautiful brains on that section. And then the solution is where they will explain, they'll give the answer, and they also have to think about how confident they are that this is the only answer or the best answer. And they talk about what is, I guess in the process is where they kind of talk about how they arrived at the solution. So the solution is just making sure that they explain how they know they're right, kind of a thing.
Yeah, and then can I jump into
in
the solution section, there might be a place to put like a generalized solution. So if you figure out the answer for this one situation that your teacher asked you for, you put it there, but also like, how could you come up with a formula or some sort of plan that it works for any situation? So that goes in there too.
Which is really fun because a lot of these problems can go way farther. And I remember my son, I have a 9th grader now, and I remember him doing one, and I don't even remember which grade he was in. I think it might've been in 6th grade. And he just he created these huge spreadsheets and just went on and on. Like there was just this opportunity to go beyond just, a simple textbook problem. And he got really excited about it. So that was very fun for me to see. And then, the extension is where they come up with kind of a question beyond what was being asked. If we changed the question a little bit, how would it be different? Or could you get that generalized solution, that type of thing. And then the self-reflection, this is where it really ties in nicely with our school mission and vision. And they really think about what virtues they had to use to solve the problem. They can think about what they could have used better next time. But they're really reflecting, what was that like for me to solve that problem? And how do I feel about getting through those hurdles? And how did I feel when I was stuck? And how, that kind of thing. So it's them reflecting on the process of solving the problem.
And I see a great question in the chat is, how much help should we be given during this process? And I think we have a handout, which we usually hand out, but we're in person. And so I'll have to find it and we'll get it to you somehow. But it's good to ask them questions that would guide them forward. Like, you don't have to know how to solve it yourself. You don't have to know the answers or anything, but the kinds of questions that would be great to ask are, what have you tried so far? What patterns are you noticing? Are you being systematic in how you're organizing your thinking? How can you organize your thinking better if they're not being systematic? What have you tried that hasn't worked? So just like asking them those kinds of questions that draw them to have to explain themselves are really helpful. And then there's a question about group work versus individual. I've always made them individual because I really want to see students' individual thinking, what they can do on it. But Ms. Schmidt, Ms. Simpson, you can jump in there if you have something else.
They do, yeah. I mean, they do all submit their own work, but I have definitely seen students collaborate and talk. They'll come to office hours together and talk through or try and make a model of the problem to try and figure out what's going on. So they often do talk with each other along the way, but and I always encourage them, that's part of what you write in the process is if somebody else gave you a hint, name them. Like, where did you get that idea from? How did you come up with that? Well, maybe they heard something and then they had to think through that for themselves, and that's totally fine. So they're not lone rangers, but they do need to explain their own process and thinking through it.
And it becomes very clear as teachers grading their work how well they personally understand it and how well they can explain it. It's pretty easy to see who's just taken an answer from somebody and put it in theirs without much thought, because you can that's what the process does. It explains all of their thinking. So the meatier their process, the better they explain, the better we can see their thinking. Yeah, so yeah, and then Ms. Simpson saying, any help they get, they should explain in the process. So if they talk to their parents, and I love this sentence in the POW where it's like, well, I got stuck, so I went to my mom and I asked, and she suggested that we draw this all out this way. And, just, it's almost like a diary. If they explain everything they do and give credit to where credit is due, then that's appropriate. But
because again, that is how mathematicians think and work.
Exactly. And you don't want to give them the answer, right? Because you want them to think for it for themselves. So that's just the boundary you have to walk, especially if you enjoy math the way I do.
I was going to add that there have been times before our sixth graders are like eager and they write everything, like when the math teachers say like write everything in how you solve this. But there's been times before when a student wrote, my parent didn't know, so they looked it up on the internet and they found the answer. And they like wrote that in their process. They like outed their own parent in the process. And then, so when you like can't explain the answer in your own words, then it's less credit. Is that?
Yeah. And so they do typically have a little longer to do the process because it is the biggest section of the paper. Like the problem statement's pretty quick, right? The question in your own words, that's a quick turnaround. The solution section, I mean, you've pretty much gotten the solution if you've made it through the process, right? So the process is the longest, it's the meatiest one, and teachers usually give like more time for that.
I'll jump in on that, and I hope my connection's a little better. I just lost my Wi-Fi and now it's back, so fingers crossed. So I just actually did some feedback on the process that sixth graders just submitted. And what I was telling students in class today is, if you've started, that's a good thing, but you can keep working on it and keep adding to it. And the fact that the solution is the next checkpoint, and I really call them checkpoints because I'm not grading the whole paper till it's really a complete, it's a full solution and a full paper, and it's been carefully thought through. So I was even telling students today, and I'll tell my other classes tomorrow, as you're working towards the solution, you're technically still working on your process, and you should be elaborating on that to get that final answer, which is a very simple sentence or two, depending on, what the problem might be. So I do think that the process, whether there's a checkpoint or not, in my classes, I don't know, Ms. Schmidt, you might do it a little differently in your classes. And then I know, Ms. Noble, your projects might be very different. But I don't grade the process until the whole thing is done. And I think that's important for students to know too. Like, it's never just done when I check the process. So that might just be helpful to add in on that.
All right. So then we have this idea of growth and fixed mindset, which, hopefully I'm imagining a lot of you have heard of this. So can you indicate somehow if you've heard of a growth and fixed mindset, if you've heard of this concept? Right. So I see some physical thumbs up. I see some clapping hands. I see some yeses in the chat. Okay, good. So we've heard of growth and fixed mindset, right? So what we want to encourage you as parents is to practice this growth mindset for yourself and model it for your students, right? Because if you are sending messages to students like, oh, I don't know, I'm bad at math, math is not my thing, even if that's what you feel in your heart, I want you to practice just saying, I'm not sure yet. It's something I'm still working on, right? So like if you can model that for your kids and try to model the fact that there's no such thing as a math person and not a math person, that'll help them have an open mind about like what they're feeling about math, right? So does anybody have any thoughts on that? Let's see, great question. Okay, go ahead. Oh, Ms. Simpson, you're answering questions in the chat.
I am, yes.
Great.
There was just a technical question about like making sure the assignment stays on the to-do list. And my solution to that is that students know that this is a long process. So if they hit that turn in button, it could disappear and they might forget they need to revisit their assignment. So I would just say it's never a bad thing to keep it as unturned in, because then it stays on their to-do list. I do check for work that's there. I don't check whether it's turned in or not. So that might be helpful to know too. Just keep it not turned in as you're working.
Yeah, Dana, you need to stop saying wait till your dad gets home because your dad's good at math, right? You're just going to have to own it and say like, I'm here to learn it with you. I'm here to struggle with this through you. We can do it together. Yeah, so that it's kind of contagious, this idea of like not being good at math. It kind of gets passed down from generation to generation. So we just kind of want to try to help you break that cycle, put a brave face forward and say, no, I can do this. I'm just learning with you. And so that's our little plug for growth.
I also love that idea of, I don't know if I can do this yet. Just adding that yet to the end is sort of like, okay, well, it might be possible. I just might have to think twice.
I have another little image that has stuck in my head. We did a training with Joe Bowler, and she had this one image up, a math professor, but had this one image up of babies in a hospital when, before they could be in the room with you. And it was like, good at math, not good at math, good at math, not good at math. That like, this is how people think it is, but that's not what you would say to a tiny baby. Like, oh, you're born, you're not good at math now. So I'm glad that the language is changing around it.
Good. So now we're going to jump into some actual math. So here's a chance to we have 5 students connected to our Pear Deck. If anybody else wants to join, if you open a second tab, that's one way to do it, and go to joinpd.com and put this fun code in. Keen Watermelons always award acidic muffins, obviously. You will get onto our Pear Deck and get to do some of the interactive slides that your kids get to do in class. If not, it's totally fine. You can just watch or do it on paper, the old-fashioned way. But I'm going to pass it off to Miss Simpson because she's doing this POW right now in 6th grade.
Ah, yes, the checkerboard POW. Have your students started complaining about it yet? And I can see Nicole's pulling her hair out from last year. The checkerboard problem. So this is the first POW that comes up in 6th grade because it's a really fun door opener, because there seems to be this obvious answer. And when students hear that the answer isn't 64, which is like, oh yeah, 8 times 8, obviously it's 64, they get a little frustrated. And I had one student say, no, that's not right. No, it has to be. How is it not 64? Because they didn't, they kind of couldn't stop themselves because they saw the 8 times 8. So the problem reads as such. Jeff and Allie got tired of playing checkers one day and started looking at the checkerboard instead. They were trying to figure out how many squares were on the checkerboard. They could not agree on an answer. How many squares do you think are on the checkerboard? So that first initial thought tends to be where that fixed mindset happens, or you want to stop your thinking, like, okay, I have an answer. I want to get this off my to-do list, right? That's what the kids are worried about. Get it off my to-do list. But that's where we revisit these problems so often, and we take a month or about a unit to get through one of these, because there's always another layer to the problem. Miss Noble, is the next slide like a trying slide? I wonder if we might jump to that before we start discussing it too deeply.
There you go.
I will give you one hint. Notice it didn't specify how big the squares should be. So if anyone is logged into the Pear Deck, I wonder if you might use that drawing tool to try to find other size squares and what those might look like, where those might be.
And what's lovely about Pear Deck is there are all these different colors that you can use. So if you want to make certain size squares, certain colors, that would be fun.
But this tends to be, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the more systematic you are in thinking about this, the easier your job will become.
Definitely. I think I was going to say that this tends to be the moment where students have an epiphany. They find a different size square and they think, oh, okay, the door is open now. I've realized something that's beyond what I originally thought. And that's the point where I notice students get really excited and they want to work on it until they figure it out. So it's really fun to watch that evolution happen from that first initial thought to that realization that there's layers and layers and layers to a problem like this. And Miss Noble, you get the pleasure of watching the Pear Decks happen. I can't see what everyone's doing.
I do. I'm going to show a few. So you can see what your classmates are thinking about. Look at that pretty one. So this one's, they've made some connections there. That there are different size Squares, here's another one, right?
Oh, beautiful. I love that there's overlapping there because there's no limit on if they have to be side by side. A square is a square. So there's like a third layer to the problem as well.
Oh, I feel like I have to share this one too. What I love about Pear Deck is I can share things and it doesn't have names on them. So it's kind of like a private way to share, but I can still share good thinking. Here's one. Oh, somebody is saying 7 becomes 49, 2 by 2. Somebody's doing some math on their slide.
Some layering, yes.
Yeah.
And I guess I will tell a little story because when I first started teaching at IVA in 6th grade, I saw this problem and I was actually afraid that I wouldn't be able to figure it out because I knew it wasn't 64, but then I thought, oh my gosh, there's so many. How could I possibly get it correct? And I think that's everyone's first reaction, including our students. So the next suggestion would be, I think what Ms. Noble alluded to is there a systematic way to organize your thinking? Because if you try to go randomly, it's almost like too much information. It's like, did I get this one? I don't know if I got that one. It's a little scattered. So that strategical planning and that organization can also really help students explain their process as far as, you know, I realized something and then I tried this, but I realized that I could get an answer by organizing it this way. And that's where sometimes I get to see really fun pictures of stuff. I've had students, you know, print out a bunch of checkerboards and start highlighting different colors, and they add that work to their POW, which makes it a really thorough process, because it's one thing to explain kind of what you're thinking, but then to show it really kind of adds depth to the POW if that's a possibility. I did just read a comment earlier on one of the POWs that said, you know, my dad was worried about ink, so I wasn't allowed to print out stuff. So instead I got an Excel spreadsheet going and I started using that, which was pretty successful. And I opened up the spreadsheet and there's all these like crazy squares going on. And I thought, whoa, that's a really cool thing that I've never thought of doing. But the options and the creativity and the organization really, really help students organize their thinking. And it's so fun to see all of these.
Right, so you can imagine a student, maybe they just want to do the 2 by 2s first, you know, and have a whole sheet of those, or 3 by 3s. And look at this great questions here. Does it go higher, 5 by 5? Is there a pattern? How do I know? So many great questions. Okay.
Wonderful.
I'm going to hide the responses now. Tell me, Ms. Schmidt or Ms. Simpson, should we stop them or should we let them explore this more?
I don't know. I guess this would be a good time to open up to initial thoughts or questions. We tend to have more 6th grade parents at these meetings since it is the first year that you're really delving into this. So I guess I'll open it up. What are some initial thoughts, questions, concerns, realizations? I'll check the chat box as well, but please feel free to unmute.
I know that this doesn't relate to me directly because in my home, my husband is in charge of learning, so I get to avoid it. But I know that my own child would have a real limited sort of resilience in problem solving. And I think it is always nice when that is sort of dealt with at school. And, you know, which is why I like that my husband's in charge. But like, I don't know, what encouragement do you have for parents in the problem solving when so much of it is happening at home right now?
Gosh, that's a really good question. I mean, anyone can jump in. And Nicole, I want to hear your thoughts because you've gone through it time and time again.
You know, as a parent, I think that it is a really great thing to give to the students. My advice is to do not procrastinate and try doing a little bit at a time because it's extremely overwhelming to them. And each POW was like, they're so different. You know, I can't describe it. You know, I think the checkerboard one, at some point we had like tracing paper scattered all over, you know, the floor, and it was just like, that's it, I'm not counting it. And it's like, okay, let's pick it back up, let's, tally and everything. And then obviously, what we went through with the toilet paper. So
Sophia.
for those who are planning on buying toilet paper rolls, don't buy the cheap kind, buy the really good thick kind, because I made the mistake. I bought the really thin one thinking, oh, it's just for the POW, I don't really need good quality. You don't want toilet paper that is going to tear easily. And I don't even know if you're going to give it this year due to the toilet paper prices. I think it's fine, but who knows?
I might modify it. It was quite a doozy, I learned, because that was the first time I'd done that toilet paper one, which Nicole's referring to. That'll happen later in the year if we do it. Yeah, that is really good advice, the not procrastinating. And I know that that's a lot of students' natural reaction is to, oh, it's not due for a week, I'm gonna, not even really think about it until an hour before it's due. And then that's when the panic sets in. And as a procrastinator myself, you know what? Sometimes it works to wait and sometimes it really doesn't. So your students are still learning themselves in that way. So there may be mistakes where they waited too long to work on something, but I will also say that encouraging your students, like, hey, have you looked at that POW in a while? Like, where'd you leave off? I loved what we were talking about earlier about just asking those questions. You don't even really have to know how to solve it or what the answer is, but hey, can you kind of tell me what your project is right now? Like, oh, I'm reading through this, I don't really understand what you mean here. Can you explain what that math is all about? And then even that process of your students becoming the teachers, that really helps them kind of solidify their own thinking. If they can explain it to someone else, then they really know what they're talking about. Ms. Schmidt, Ms. Noble?
Yeah. I was just going to add one more thing in terms of like the procrastination. I think another reason is because these types of bigger problems, your brain needs time to just mull over it and process it. And sometimes you'll have that little light bulb, not when you're sitting down to do the problem, but you'll be taking a walk and all of a sudden something will kind of click. So I think it's very easy to avoid because the problems can feel overwhelming and difficult. It's easy to put it off, right? We all avoid things that are challenging. So I think just sitting down and thinking about it when you don't have the stress of it being due, so that the students can start to think about different strategies and stuff, really helps give them the space to be able to think deeply about the problem.
Yeah, I was going to add almost that same thing, like that one of the best strategies sometimes is to walk away, because sometimes you get in a rut, like a thinking rut, and you can't break out of it and think of it a new way until you like sleep on it or something. So sometimes just taking that break is helpful. But I was also going to say, so Miss Bryant, you don't really want your child to come to you and be like, I'm so stressed about this. You can send them to their teachers, like help them write an email to their teachers or help them come to office hours. I think that would be a good strategy as well.
That's so weird. I know that strategy and I totally forgot about it. I was like, I gotta do this by myself.
I want to put a little plug for office hours. A lot of students are very quick to log off, but I've noticed that the 2 sixth graders that have stayed behind this whole month really were able to get some like specific questions answered from me about this, that, or the other. So please encourage your students to use that time. Otherwise, it's just 10 minutes of me saying, okay, well, I guess the meeting's over. And, like it could be so beneficial if there was even like one thing that could be clarified in office hours. Which I know is hard to want to stay on Zoom be the only person with your teacher in a Zoom meeting, but we're all very nice.
I see that somebody asked how much time on average is spent on a POW. It's like a month-long process. When I was doing them, I encouraged kids to work on it at least 20 minutes a day for 5 days a week. And hopefully that was enough. But I that's just such an average, like, because maybe they want to sit down and work for like an hour and then not do any the next day.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the more times you think about it, the sooner you might have one of those epiphanies, or at least have more time to have an epiphany, where if you're kind of thinking about it a little bit every day, then there might be that day where you just realize, and then you kind of, bust out your whole process. And then you're good to go because you finally had that click moment. So I would say too, like I don't know if averaging is helpful or if it's sort of just like having enough time to have the realization that's necessary.
I do like the idea of repeat exposure.
Mm.
Like if you look at it a little bit all the time, you might make more breakthroughs than if you save it all and try to look at it once. I love the breakthrough this person made, that there's 2x2s, 3x3s, 4x4s, 5x5s, 6, all the way to 8x8s, even 1x1s there. I think for the sake of time, we should move on.
Okay.
And just because there's a lot of 6th grade parents here, we thought we'd give a little bit of time for Ms. Simpson to talk about interpreting math grades in 6th grade.
Yeah, and I will say that I think the three of us are pretty well aligned in how we grade, you know, the types of grading we do, and also like using the same sort of marking. So I hope this is helpful advice for every level. Things to look for in the grade book. One thing that I see very often at the beginning of the year are grades that fluctuate a lot. And I think I sent a very lengthy email out maybe 2 weeks into the school year, which had a lot of like detailed, like, what about this? What about that? Because I noticed that comes up, and I wanted to give you an answer for that question when it came up. But things to look for, especially early in the year, are there any assignments missing? Because it could very well be that your student has done the work and they just somehow didn't turn it in correctly, or they don't know the process yet. You know, they've got their notebook items, but then they just never showed them to me. So I'm not a mind reader, so I would never know that if they didn't physically show me or send me an email or turn in images. So that's the kind of stuff that gets cleared up in the first month or two, is just, you know, solidifying processes, emailing me to answer questions like, you know, hey, I don't understand the gradebook right now, what's going on? And I can give a hint here or there. Another thing that happens in math more regularly than other classes is that we do assessments, like these checkup quizzes that are graded basically every week. So grades are getting input constantly that affect the majority of the gradebook. So what we've decided to offer for online learning are retakes. So if a student doesn't do well in a quiz and maybe early in the year it sort of tanks their grade, there's that opportunity for the retake that can really just pull it right back up right away. So some students will kind of do this little curve thing the whole semester, but it really evens out once there's more in the gradebook, and more often, like the more often that students take those opportunities, it really smooths out later. But if there's, you know, quizzes that were never retaken, and then there's these sort of like lower points holding it back, I can only call it a missed opportunity. Would anyone else like to add thoughts on that before I ramble?
Yeah, I would just say, like, especially 6th grade, looking at, because it's probably your first time having all your kids' grades on Illuminate where you can see everything.
Yeah.
Math grades early and rigorously, and other subjects don't necessarily get to their first performance task or their first big writing until like now. So in the first month of school, it may feel like your child's doing worse in math than they're doing in their other subjects, but it's only because we jump right to, like, the first week of school, we do a concept and then we have a little quiz. And so that first quiz really affects the grade because it's the only thing in the grade book, as Kathy was saying. But the other classes don't really have that yet. So they might look like they're getting A's in everything except math. And we just wanted to explain the difference in math versus other subjects.
And that's simultaneous while all these new procedures and technologies are being learned. So it kind of feels like it overwhelms quickly in a subject like math. In the chat, thanks, Linda, for saying, what does M or SW mean? Sorry, Gabi, were you going to address that other question?
I was just going to say also that those assessments are weighted. I don't know in elementary school that the teachers like weight different grades, but the assessments count for like 60% of the grade. So you might see they did all these, you know, home thinking assignments. They have all these perfect scores. And then, but in the beginning, that very first test is counting for like 60% of their grade before we have a number of tests. And so it can really affect it strongly. Yeah, the M in these are markings in Illuminate. So If you're looking for your student's grade, don't look at Google Classroom because that gets used all kinds of different ways. That's where we really assign the work. But in Illuminate is where you can see what their actual scores are. And the M stands for missing. And so that means like if we just haven't graded it yet, it'll just be blank and that does not affect the score. But if we've graded it and all the other students have scores for that, but your student did not turn it in, or we somehow didn't get it, then it turns into a missing and that affects their, their percentage. The SW means still working. So maybe like on a POW or something, we've seen a little evidence along the way that they started it, but they never turned in the final. And the still working, I think, goes in as like a 50%. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The missing goes in as a 30% because zeros tend to tank grades more and we don't want to disproportionately hurt kids. So if something's just missing, the lowest they get is a 30%. But still working, we put as a 50% because it's like we saw that they started, but we just never saw it finished. And I think we kind of addressed the bottom question. How is math different than other core subjects? Because I jumped the gun and talked about that already.
And again, the M stands for missing and the SW is still working. I don't know if that was after.
Okay, are there any questions? You've now been in school for almost an hour. Do you guys have any other questions? I mean, we're gonna jump to this reflection. So in the chat, you can put either, and I used to think, and now I think, or what in our exploration or discussion is pushing your thinking beyond your first thoughts. Or you can just unmute and say these things out loud. We don't have a huge group, so we can all just talk to each other. I like this moment when everybody's just typing. Yes, a shout out to Miss Gordon. She's the one member of our math team who isn't here tonight. She supports our 8th graders in an algebra lab class. And I don't think there could be a better person for that job because she likes to make sure people get their stuff done.
I call her the to-do list queen. She's all over it.
All right. Does anybody else have any thoughts?
I just think math was a bad word.
And now what do you think?
Yeah.
A fun word.
Thank you, Linda. Oh, thanks, Cassie. You used to think you're bad at math, but now you know you just have this potential. You can do it.
Maybe Sophia has some advice for POWs. Does Sophia have a little thing to share?
The spotlight.
Well, I definitely agree. But I don't think we should procrastinate just because they're really hard. And I think you should take your time on them because they're super hard and they're super confusing. And they can give you they're really tricky for your brain. So I think you should really take your time on them and just really focus on them. So what's one thing you like about it? I like how tricky it is, and I just really like working on them.
Sophia, I have a question for you. I heard you say words like tricky, confusing. You did kind of like a brain exploding thing right there. How did you do on the POWs though, even though you felt kind of confused? Because I remember you had some very thorough work. So that idea of typing out all your steps, do you think that was helpful for you, even if you didn't know what you were doing?
Can I give an example? So, for example, today in math, actually, so when we were doing the warm up, I had a question for, I think it was I was asking you and I was like, and then you answered and I was like, oh, okay, got it. And then I looked at it and I was like, I didn't get it.
So I saw some examples, and then I was like, okay, I get it. So I just really like, I guess like I have to like really read it, like really like thoroughly, like I have really read it. And also like teamwork is definitely the best, just because like when I was like on my desk, I was like, yeah, I was on my desk like when I was doing the POW, like it was like really frustrating and stuff. So I asked my mom for help, and like, oh my god, we just got it done, and it was great.
I didn't do it for her.
No, like we did work together like on the whole.
But those moments to ask for help, just getting like a hint or like a new direction that's really what it is. It's like, okay, I've tried all these things and then now I'm stuck. I need a tidbit. I need something. And that's when you can email one of us and say, hey, I'm stuck. Or that's when you can, students can go to mom, dad, whoever, and say, okay, I need a nudge. And that's where you can come in and say, okay, what have you thought about so far? Did you try this yet? And emailing office hours, I can't push it enough, just to like have that moment to get like a nudge in the right direction, and reading comments too on the POW, which are usually little hints.
Yeah, definitely.
It is pretty exciting to see the students are very proud of their work. When they have a problem that's really tough and they work through it, that is the best thing to grow that growth mindset and give them that experience of, wow, I figured this out eventually. And that empowers them to tackle lots of other problems in math and life. So
I wanted to add to that too, because I just had this memory of, there was a student in our very first class who did all these POWs all through the years, and she went to apply to a private high school, and they wanted her to put together a portfolio of the work she was most proud of, and she put in multiple POWs that she had done throughout her time at IVA, because she really like took her time and she felt really good about the work she had put into them.
Miss Noble and Miss Simpson and Miss Schmidt, I realized that I remember seeing the analogy of the puzzle in previous POW nights. Can you just speak to that?
Yeah, this is, that's Miss Bryant's dog. We used to have this slide in there, but we didn't want it to feel too like, I don't know, heavy-handed. But, imagine this is, I put this in for myself because I'm a math teacher and my kids went to a high school where they had to do POWs. And I would get so excited when they would come home with a POW that they would like want to hide it from me, because I'd want to just take it and solve it. And I thought it was really fun. But imagine you've put together a puzzle and you have everything done except the last piece. And then your parent comes in when you're not home and just puts that piece in the puzzle for you. Like, it takes like all the fun out of it. And I was totally that parent who wanted to put in the last piece of the puzzle for my kids. But the other extreme is if this was actually more my problem, I would put together almost the whole puzzle for them and then just let them put the last piece in. But even then, they don't get much ownership over the puzzle. They can't look at the whole thing and say like, I feel really empowered that I did this whole thing if mom put in more than half the puzzle, for you. So it's kind of that, like, let them have that ownership over their puzzle. This is the lecture I give myself. Let them have that ownership over the puzzle so that they can feel the satisfaction when they've done it and done it well. But you can like help them organize their puzzle pieces. Like maybe you're like, hey, why don't you put all the edges in a pile? Or hey, why don't you, sort by color? Those kind of I'm taking the analogy a little far now, but
And then for me, what I'm taking from this is notice as the adult when they're stressed out or when they've stopped their problem solving strategies, and help them like take a break or email the teacher, or take a break and then email the teacher.
I would love to add on to that puzzle analogy, because I am also a huge fan of analogies. Even if you can't get to that last piece of the puzzle, maybe there's like some gaps here and there. It might be enough to see kind of what the picture's looking like. So even that's worth talking about in the POW process, especially, like I got my edges organized, all the greens fit, but then I just couldn't finish it, but this is what I think it's looking like. And this is as far as I got. And I also had a student ask in class today, if I get the wrong answer, does that mean it's a bad grade? And my answer to that is not necessarily, because that is one very tiny piece of the puzzle. Now we're back to that analogy again, but truly the final answer, if you just put only the right answer, the POW isn't very good because there's no thinking, there's no process, there's no journey. So even that, like even getting just the right answer, that's not very interesting, and that's not like growing your thinking. But a paper where there's been a lot of trials and a lot of thinking, and I've tried this and this didn't work, and I've tried that and that didn't work, but you know what, this is as far as I got. I had a paper like that they were nowhere near the right answer, but they had explained so much thinking and how far they got. It was an A paper because they had really tried and pushed themselves and opened their mind to possibilities. So, you know, in that situation, that not correct answer, very thorough thinking would score better than the right answer, here's my sentence, I'm done, off the to-do list paper, in my opinion. So.
Right. Are there any other questions or comments? We're here for you. We've only been here for 66 minutes out of 80.
Yeah, I'm looking in the chat, a few comments along similar lines, like, yeah, you guys are not on your own. Feel free to reach out, or better yet, have your student email us first, because then they kind of get to own that response and get to process it their own way. Okay, I'm seeing a few more comments and questions coming in. Is it okay to let our kid hand in a POW that we know they didn't get the right answer, or go far enough if they're feeling really good about the work they did? Will their teacher then go in and ask them to try additional methods? Should we stop them before they hand it in? So this is where that sort of 5-week or month process kind of comes into play. At this point right now, no one's going to be done with their POW, though it's, you know, the process is quote unquote due, or it was due this week. But that's where, because it's a back and forth on the Google document, we're able to add comments, suggestions. I do try to give leading questions that would lead to maybe more work or a different way of thinking about it. So the only time I would maybe really like, should I stop them before they hand it in and make them explore more? I would just say at the very end of the entire POW, when they're ready to turn in that final draft and you've seen them work on it for many weeks, I would just ask them, like, have you tried everything? You know, did you think about this? And again, it's okay to guide them, but I would say, I think it was maybe Miss Noble, you said, let them own sort of their POW at whatever stage it's at, because this is a developing process. I teach 6th grade and 7th grade, and the same students from their very first POW in 6th grade, it's like incredible, beautiful growth from their first project in 7th grade, because they've grown through it and they've learned kind of like how the expectations develop. So that's some of my advice for that. And again, it's okay if it's not the right answer, as long as they've done everything to explain what they have done or whatever kind of thinking they've done. And then, you know, they can learn from the comments and try it a new way on the next POW too.
I would say that a lot of kids don't really read the teacher comments and make the changes that the teacher is suggesting. So like, maybe in addition to everything wonderful that Kathy just said, like, if your kid's about to turn it in, maybe just say like, hey, check to see if you've resolved all your teacher comments. And by resolve, I don't mean just click resolve, like read it and see if there's some adjustment. Because sometimes kids get stuck in their thinking and they don't really want to hear, they're not open to hearing new suggestions, because that would mean more work. So just kind of encouraging them to stay open-minded and read those teacher comments.
Oh, and one thing I want to add to that before I forget, don't delete work. Even if, oh, I started this way and then I realized something, keep all of that in there. So that's another thing that kids want to do. They want to hide their mistakes, but that's really part of the process too. So, you know, as they're seeing those comments and resolving them, like truly resolving them, that should be added on to it. It makes me so sad when students like delete all their work because of a comment, and I'm like, nah, that was good stuff. We just got to go to the next step, you know?
Same with the comments. Like they don't need to resolve their teacher comments. It's nice to see them there when you're grading, because you're like, okay, I gave them this comment. Let me see if they, you know, adjusted. All right. Any other questions? Go ahead, Ms. Brent.
Just a thought that we are at Intellectual Virtues Academy, and I think that we selected, or the math team selected POWs because they really encourage the practice of intellectual virtues. But can you like say something to that, or how POWs might be requiring something different than what you are on a daily basis?
I would say that, you know, most often when people think about middle school and high school math, it's a lot of procedures and practice of those procedures, and not really thinking about like the bigger picture of how math is in everything and how we're looking for patterns and things like that. So I think this gives a nice balance, because we do have to still learn procedures. We have to learn how to multiply fractions and divide with decimals and all of that stuff. But this kind of adds that, that bigger picture math to balance out the procedures that we do still have to teach and learn. Anybody else want to add to that, or is that?
Can you restate the question, please, so I can think it through?
Just why are POWs important at IVA?
And what kind of thinking is different? I also sort of like, I know that every subject creates opportunities for different kinds of thinking. What are the virtues that you feel like in math are most developed or given opportunity for?
That intellectual tenacity. I think if there's one thing that POWs can help hone, is that intellectual tenacity, and even that intellectual courage to ask questions and to try new things that one hasn't necessarily thought of. And it's really pushing past that initial reaction, like I have an answer, I want to hold on to it for dear life because that means I did it, but taking it to that next step of looking deeper.
I would also point out that you can't grow in any intellectual virtue unless you're being given tasks that push you to grow in it. So you can't grow in tenacity if you're always doing easy things. Mm-hmm. So we have to give them something hard in order for them to grow in tenacity.
I think also it gives them a lot of practice to just think through strategies for themselves. Like, not so much of math is, this is how you do this, right? And then you kind of replicate that. And so this gives them a really beautiful opportunity to solve problems on their own in so many different ways, and really think through using their own logic and curiosity and going beyond, just the straightforward kind of procedures of a problem.
The thinking through and understanding how to do something is so much more diverse and useful than having like a formula for something. And that's a trap that, you know, in high school, like I've seen so many kids like, what's the formula? You know, they want to know the tool, but the understanding how to use the tool, or if you forgot your tool at home or you can't remember the formula, can you recreate it? Can you still solve the problem? That's where those other critical thinking skills come into play. And something like the POW really gives students a chance to develop those critical thinking skills in a way that is very personal to them. I mean, the POWs look so very different, and everyone thinks so differently. So they should look different, I think.
I just have a question that just occurred to me. Do you get to really understand like the different ways that kids think, especially through the POW? Like, does it reveal something more? Why?
So much.
Is it the problem statement that reveals how
it's the process. It's true. You know, as a teacher, it's the most dreaded, but also the most beautiful thing we do, right? Like, to sit down. My God, I got to grade those POWs. I got to give feedback. I got to read it. But then I can't tell you how often, like on a Saturday morning, I'm reading these and I'm like, oh, like this is beautiful. And I'm like putting on Slack, look what this person did. And I got this trip down this student's mind and just how it works and how they unfolded this. So I love getting to know their mathematical thinking process in a way that we really don't, on a quiz or something like that. So.
And I feel like I've been giving these POWs for a long time, and every year there's at least one kid that explains it in a way that I've never seen before, and it just totally opens my mind. And I love that about, it happens in our curriculum as well, but I love it because, there are a lot of people who are kids come in with as fifth graders thinking they're good at math. There's that fixed mindset message, right? And they think they don't really have anything to gain from maybe sixth grade math because they already know how to do fractions and they already know and they have this kind of fixed idea about what it means to know something. But I try to tell kids all the time that I think if I'm going to be fixed mindset about it, I'm pretty good at math. Like I've done this a lot, right? Like I definitely know sixth grade math really well and seventh grade math and eighth grade math, but every year somebody will explain something that opens my mind to a new way of thinking about it. And I learn every single year something new. So I think it's important to tell kids, like, even if you feel like you know something really well, there's always more out there that you can gain by hearing other people's ways of thinking. And grading the POWs is just me seeing everybody's way of thinking, and it grows my understanding. So I feel like if our understanding can grow as teachers who have taught this subject for many years, like the kids can certainly grow in their understanding, even if they already feel like they know a lot of the concepts.
I think that you guys are just the most brilliant teachers, and I know that I'm quite biased, but there's another analogy that was used before about going on a walk, like a nature walk. That's one of my favorite, most beautiful analogies, and I just like thinking about it about math. Can you?
Okay, yeah. So I wrote a blog post that I don't think has ever become a blog post, but I wrote it for IVA. I don't know where it is, but I always go to the mountains every summer to do art camp. And while I don't tend to prefer art activities, I do go on all the group hikes. And so year after year, for the past 10 years, I've gone on the same hike. And what I've noticed is the first year that you're hiking on a trail, you can't really enjoy the surroundings as much because you're just kind of getting one foot in front of the other and you don't know quite where you're going, and you're just kind of trudging forward. But as you go on the same hike again and again and again, you become more comfortable with the trail, and you can like lift up your head and look around and enjoy and take in things a little bit more. So anytime your kid is doing something in math where they feel like, I learned this last year, that's an opportunity to be like, we're walking this trail again, but because you already have some familiarity with it, you can now take in the bigger picture, or like, the patterns, or you can make connections that your mind wasn't free to make the first time you were walking the trail because you were too busy just learning how to walk on the trail. So there's a blog post out there that is somewhere going to be published someday that I've written,
Very
and it's just
soon. I love
sitting
it.
in my Google Drive somewhere. Thanks, Jackie.
I just love it so much. I love it. Thank you. Thank you guys for the way that you devote yourselves to student learning. I'm so glad that we have you as math teachers for these kids. And we have like one more minute. If anybody has anything else they want to say, it's in this last minute, and then we all are out to our evenings.
Thank you, guys. I loved seeing the jazz hands.
Dana, thank you for your physical participation.
Yeah. Yes, laying down new tracks in their brain. That's right. Love it.
Oh, Jennifer, I'm connecting to what you're saying about the formulas. That's the slippery slope. You rely on the memory and not the the reason behind.
Ooh, I will say, like, our kids go off to high school and they say they actually remember the stuff they learned in middle school because they understand the why, and they don't just have this list of formulas that they were forced to memorize. So I think that is something that's awesome about our curriculum.
Okay, well, I like to joke, especially in this time when there's like no resolution to quarantine and things like that. I like to joke at the end of meetings, we figured it all out. Good job, everybody. No problems from here on out. Just joking. But we are
problems.
we're definitely a team. So reach out, have your kids reach out to teachers, and thank you all for being here tonight. And you'll see this recording in the newsletter. Have a great night. Have a good evening.
Thank
Bye.
you all so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yay, thank you.
Composing music.
Kathy, I think we need to play that podcast on Tuesday.
Yeah, tessellations. Love that pentagon.
Oh, what a
Good
good
song, Miss Noble.
One day.
Yeah, for a night session.
I know we've got
I
everyone
do love
working on their screens, and
Especially in the fall where it's dark right now.
I noticed that from the beginning to now, my face is now like very shadowed.
I literally have like a science lamp over here.
Yeah, I suppose if I lean back, I can catch a little bit of it.
It's like 100 degrees. I feel like a lizard in a cage.
I know, it's
I'll stop recording now.
Oh, okay.